first job. For some of us, that may take us back to a summer job in high school, where you're working for an hourly wage. How hard did you have to work? And how much money did you make? Have you ever wondered if you should have been paid more for that job? Have you ever wondered what the consequences of raising your wage would be? According to the Department of Labor, the federal minimum wage was established in 1938. At that time, it started at 25 cents an hour, and it's been adjusted to increased 9 times by legislation to the current rate that it is now at $7.25 an hour, where it has remained since 2009, when President Obama signed that legislation. The Economic Policy Institute and the Bureau of Labor Statistics both report that by today's standards, taking into account, of course, inflation, hourly workers today earn less than their counterparts did 50 years ago. And we have 1.7 million workers that make at or less than federal minimum wage. Because of that statistic, the Fight for 15 movement began in 2012. I don't know if you're aware, but several hundred workers, restaurant workers in particular, walked out of their jobs in solidarity in New York. This movement is backed by the Service Employee International Union. Out of that came HR 582, Raise the Wage Act, which was passed in the House of Representatives in 2019. It currently sits in the Senate for vote. It hasn't been voted on yet, but it will probably be something that comes up in the next election, hint, hint, presidential election 2020, this fall. HR 582 states that $15 an hour is where federal minimum wage should be. I'm saying $15 an hour is just too high to not cause negative impacts on small businesses, the economy, and the workers that it's written to help elevate. Small businesses do not have the resources to absorb such increases in their operating costs, and many will close or relocate. They will reduce the number of employees with layoffs and/or reduce their hours. This will increase costs to consumers because it will be passed on to them and increase our inflation. Proponents of Fight for 15 claim that it will help workers by decreasing pay inequality and elevate workers out of poverty. It will increase economic activity because these workers will now have more money to spend, and it will spur job growth because these workers will now feel more invested in their jobs because they'll be being paid more. But I'm going to talk to you about the facts and some research that's going to prove that those things might not happen quite the way they think it will. It will increase job losses, decrease hours, and decrease monthly pay. In 2014, Seattle, Washington was the first city to implement $15 an hour, an ordinance all on their own. And since then, the University of Washington, their faculty and graduate students, have been able to do some research studies just to assess how the wage increase impacted their city. And what they found is what we're going to talk about today. According to a study published in the National Bureau of Economic Research in Cambridge, Massachusetts in June 2017, and then again revised in 2018, they reported employment losses with Seattle's increase in minimum wage, particularly in the city's low wage market. It was insignificant at $11 an hour, but became highly significant at $13 an hour, resulting in a large drop of employment. Large cuts in amounts of hours for employees worked, causing monthly pay to decrease 6 to 7%. So it impacted our workers. Hourly workers are competing with each other for jobs and for wages. They're not competing with their boss for wages. So if you increase minimum wage, you'll freeze out those in the low wage market and hurt them. Looking at the impact on small businesses, the effect of a singular policy can affect more than one payroll. And I'll give you an example of that. According to an article published in late December 2018 special issue of Social Work and Society International Online Journal published a research paper, and it was titled, Responding to an Increase in Minimum Wage, a Mixed Method Study of Childcare Businesses During the Implementation of Seattle's Minimum Wage Ordinance. This study reported more than half of Seattle's childcare businesses impacted negatively by the increase in labor costs when the wage increased to $13 an hour. They suspect that the majority would be impacted when the wage would hit $15 an hour. The response to these increased labor costs was an increase in parents' tuition fees, which, by the way, was the primary source of business income for those businesses. By businesses now being forced to absorb or redistribute operating expenditures, the economy will now be negatively impacted by the increased price of goods and services, thus negating any advantage gained by workers getting their wages increased. Is there anyone in this room who can say that they have never used self-checkout at a store or purchased something from a company that utilized technology to replace workers? These can be results of negative impacts. So now you can go back to that initial question I asked you. Should you have been paid more at your hourly wage job back in high school? Can you understand now that there are many aspects to consider before debating or contemplating wage increases? And perhaps a better way to approach this, raising minimum wage, not going excessively high, but perhaps incrementally slower to keep pace with inflation, would have less effects or minimal effects as we go. Something to consider when the next elections start coming up. Thank you.